The smell hit first. Bacon grease, burnt coffee, and something older. The kind of stale desperation that seeps into wood grain and never leaves. Delilah Boone stood at the industrial stove in her uncle's roadside diner, hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd stopped thinking about what they were doing years ago. Crack eggs. Flip hash browns. Don't burn the toast. Repeat. Outside the kitchen window, Colorado's mountains rose like broken teeth against a gray November sky. Beautiful, people called them. Delilah called them what they were. A wall keeping her trapped in this dying town where nothing grew except cruelty. "Order up," she called, her voice barely carrying over the clatter of plates and the low rumble of male voices in the dining room. No one answered. They never did. 24 years old, and she'd spent 9 of them in this kitchen, feeding men who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. The heavy girl. The quiet one. Her Uncle Marcus's charity case, though he made sure everyone knew she earned her keep. Just never enough to leave. "Delilah, get out here!" Marcus's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Not the usual bark when orders backed up. Something else. Something that made her stomach clench. She pushed through the swinging door, wiping her hands on her apron. The diner had maybe 20 customers this morning, the usual crowd of ranch hands, truckers, and drifters who treated the place like a way station between nowhere and somewhere worse. But today felt different. The energy was wrong. Men clustered in groups, talking low, casting glances toward the corner booth where Marcus stood. He wasn't alone. 3 men Delilah didn't recognize sat with him. City clothes, but wearing them wrong. Too clean for this place. Too deliberate. One had a leather ledger open on the table. Another was counting cash. "Come here, girl," Marcus said, gesturing impatiently. Delilah's feet moved before her brain caught up. Years of conditioning. When Marcus called, you came. She stopped a few feet from the booth, suddenly aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Heat crept up her neck. Her size had always made her visible in the worst way. Too big, too much, too easy to mock. She'd learned to make herself small in other ways. Quiet. Agreeable. Invisible where it counted. "Gentlemen, this is my niece, Delilah. These men are from Denver. They run a employment service." Employment service. The word sat strange in the air. "She's the cook?" The man with the ledger looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his assessment. His gaze lingered on her hips, her chest, her face, cataloging, dismissing. "Best in 3 counties, Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made Delilah's skin crawl. Pride, but not the kind an uncle should have. The kind a man has when showing off livestock. Been training her since she was 15. Works 16-hour days, never complains, strong as an ox. "Jesus, Marcus," Delilah breathed. "Quiet," he snapped. Then, to the men, "Like I said, obedient." The room had gone still. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the coffee pot stopped its eternal gurgling. In that silence, Delilah heard something that would haunt her forever. A laugh. Low at first, then spreading. Men she'd fed every morning for years. Men who'd nodded polite thanks when she refilled their coffee. Men who'd told her she made the best biscuits they'd ever tasted, laughing at her. "You're selling me," she said. Not a question. The words tasted like copper. "Don't be dramatic. It's a contract. These gentlemen broker labor agreements for wealthy families out west. Ranches, mostly. They need someone who can cook for crews, handle provisions, keep a household running in remote areas. Or..." Marcus's voice had taken on a rehearsed quality, like he'd practiced this speech. "You'll have steady work, guaranteed wages. You're selling me. I'm giving you an opportunity." His fist hit the table hard enough to make the coffee cups jump. "What exactly do you think you have here? You think I can keep feeding you forever? You think any man in this town is going to marry you looking like that?" The words landed like punches. Not because they were new, she'd heard variations her whole life, but because he said them here, now, in front of everyone. "The bidding starts at $500, the man with the ledger announced, standing up. His voice carried across the diner with practiced authority. 5-year contract, room and board provided. We take a 20% placement fee." Delilah's vision tunneled. This wasn't happening, couldn't be happening. She looked around the room, searching for what? Sympathy? Outrage? Someone to stand up and say this was wrong? She found nothing but averted eyes and uncomfortable shuffles. 500? Someone called from near the door. Laughter followed. 550. A trucker she'd served breakfast to an hour ago. 600. More laughter. The bids came faster, men treating it like sport, like entertainment. Some were genuine, hard-faced ranchers calculating the value of a cook who could handle isolation. Others just wanted to be part of the spectacle, to say they'd been there the day Marcus Boone sold off his fat niece. Delilah's hands had started shaking. She gripped her apron to hide it, fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. The pain helped, gave her something to focus on besides the humiliation burning through her chest. 700. 725. 8. The numbers climbed. She should run, bolt for the kitchen, grab her coat, disappear into the mountains. But her legs wouldn't move. Shock had turned her body to stone, rooted her to this spot while men decided her value in dollars and cents. $1,000. The voice came from the doorway. It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. The tone cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. Quiet, flat, final. Every head in the diner turned. He stood in the entrance with morning light behind him, tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the frame. Had to be 6'4", maybe more. Broad shoulders under a heavy canvas coat, dark with age and weather. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples. A face that looked carved rather than born, all hard angles and severe lines, the kind of features you got from surviving things that killed softer men. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, unreadable, fixed on her with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. Delilah had never seen him before. Would have remembered. This wasn't a man who blended into crowds. That's Colt Maddox, someone whispered, and the name rippled through the diner like wind through grass. She'd heard stories, everyone had. The mountain rancher who ran cattle in the high country where most men wouldn't last a winter. Didn't come to town except twice a year for supplies. Didn't talk to anyone. Didn't need to. The land he worked had broken bigger, tougher men than most could imagine. They said he was dangerous. Looking at him now, Delilah believed it. Mr. Maddox, the man with the ledger said, recovering his professional demeanor, that's a generous bid, but we should give others a chance to— $1,000, Colt repeated, pulling a roll of bills from his coat pocket. He didn't count them out, just tossed the entire bundle on the nearest table with the casual indifference of a man to whom money meant nothing. Cash. Right now. The ledger man looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the money. Sold, he said, just like that. 9 years of 16-hour days. 9 years of feeding this town, keeping this diner alive while Marcus drank away the profits. 9 years of swallowing insults and mockery and loneliness. Sold for $1,000, and her uncle didn't even hesitate. Colt crossed the room in 4 strides. Up close, he was even bigger, even more intimidating. He smelled like pine smoke and leather and cold air, like the mountains themselves had claimed him. He stopped in front of her, and Delilah realized with a start that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You got things you need to pack?" he asked. His voice matched his appearance, rough, low, economical with words. Delilah's mouth wouldn't work. Her brain screamed at her to say something, anything, but no sound came out. "She's got a room upstairs," Marcus offered. "Nothing much. She travels light." "I'm asking her." Colt didn't look at Marcus, didn't acknowledge he'd spoken. His attention stayed locked on Delilah. "You got things?" She found her voice somewhere in the wreckage of her composure. "Some clothes, a few books." He nodded once. "Get them. We leave in 10 minutes." It wasn't a request. Delilah moved in a daze, muscle memory carrying her through the diner, up the back stairs, into the cramped room that had been her entire world outside the kitchen. A twin bed, a dresser with a broken drawer, a window that looked out at the parking lot. Her belongings fit in a single duffel bag. 9 years, 1 bag. She stood there holding it, staring at the bare mattress, the water-stained ceiling, the walls she'd memorized in the dark during countless sleepless nights. Part of her had always imagined leaving this place. In those fantasies, she'd saved enough money, packed carefully, walked out with her head high. Not like this. Never like this. Delilah. Marcus stood in the doorway. He didn't come in. Hadn't been in her room in years. You understand this is for the best. You'll have real work, steady pay. Out there nobody knows you, fresh start. She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the broken blood vessels in his nose from too much whiskey, the yellowed teeth from too many cigarettes, the eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. You sold me, she said quietly. I gave you a chance. You sold me to a stranger for $1,000 because feeding me was too expensive. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. At least be honest about it. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Shame, maybe, or just annoyance at being called out. You think you're going to do better somewhere else? Look at yourself, girl. This is the best offer you're ever going to get. Delilah pushed past him, shoulder hitting his heart enough to make him stumble. She didn't look back. Didn't say goodbye to the room, the diner, the life she'd known. What was there to say goodbye to? Colt waited by a truck that had seen better decades, rusted, dented, held together by what looked like pure stubbornness. He took her bag without asking, tossed it in the bed next to sacks of feed and coils of rope. The city men had already left. The diner's customers had filtered back to their tables, the show over. Through the window, Delilah could see Marcus behind the counter counting money. You scared of heights? Colt asked, opening the passenger door. What? Heights. You scared of them? No. Good. Road gets narrow up where we're going. He said it like a warning. Delilah climbed into the truck, the springs groaning under her weight. The sound made her wince, but if Colt noticed or cared, he didn't show it. He got in the driver's side, started the engine. It coughed, died, started again on the third try, and pulled out of the parking lot. Just like that, her old life disappeared in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence. The town fell away quickly, replaced by scrub pine and rocky soil. The road climbed, switchback after switchback, and the air got thinner. Colt drove with the easy confidence of someone who'd made this trip 1,000 times, one hand on the wheel, watching the road with half his attention, while the rest seemed focused on something only he could see. Delilah kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to make herself smaller. Harder to do in a truck cab where every bump and turn pressed her against the door or the center console. She was hyper-aware of the space she took up, the way the seat belt cut across her chest, the soft flesh of her thighs spreading on the bench seat. Stop it, she told herself. He already bought you. The assessment's over. The thought made her stomach turn. You can ask, Colt said suddenly. She jumped at the sound of his voice. Ask what? Questions. You got questions. Did she? Yes. 1,000. Where are we going? What do you want from me? Why did you pay so much? Are you going to hurt me? Why? She finally said. Why what? Why me? There were probably cheaper options, younger, prettier. The word tasted bitter, but she forced it out. Might as well be honest. They both knew what she was. Colt was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I need a cook who won't quit after 2 weeks when they realize how isolated the ranch is. Someone who can handle hard work, long hours, rough conditions. He glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. Your uncle said you've been doing all that for 9 years. That true? Yeah. Then that's why. It was the most practical answer imaginable. No romance, no rescue fantasy, just cold calculation of her value as a worker. Somehow, that made her feel a little better. I ain't gonna hurt you, he added, like he'd read her thoughts. And before you ask, separate room, separate space. You work for me, that's it. Contract's 5 years, but you want to leave before that, you can. I'll pay you fair wages, and if you decide the mountains ain't for you, I'll drive you back to town myself. No questions. Delilah stared at him. Why would you tell me that? Because it's true. No, I mean, she struggled to articulate it. You paid $1,000. If I leave, you lose that. Money's just money. I ain't keeping someone who don't want to be there. The sincerity in his voice was almost harder to process than everything else that had happened today. She didn't trust it. Couldn't. Men didn't just let you leave. They found ways to keep you, to make you feel like leaving was impossible, or your fault, or worse than staying. But sitting there in that rattling truck, watching the mountains grow closer and more imposing, Delilah made a decision. She'd stay alert, stay ready. And the absolute second, this went bad, she'd run. She'd survived 9 years with Marcus. She could survive this. The road kept climbing. After an hour, the pavement ended. After 2, civilization disappeared entirely. No more power lines, no more signs. Just dirt track carved into the mountainside, so narrow in places that Delilah could look out her window and see nothing but open air dropping away into valleys so deep they held their own weather. "We're still in Colorado, right?" she asked, only half joking. "Barely. Property line's about 10 miles ahead." "How big is the property?" 15,000 acres, give or take." Delilah tried to picture 15,000 acres and failed. The biggest thing she'd ever known was the diner's parking lot. The sun was past its peak when they finally crested a ridge and the ranch came into view. Calling it a ranch felt inadequate. It was more like a compound carved out of the wilderness by sheer force of will. A main house built from logs that looked older than the town she'd left behind. Outbuildings scattered around it, barns, stables, sheds, what might have been a bunkhouse. Corrals holding horses and cattle. Beyond it all, peaks rising so high they disappeared into cloud cover. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It was also completely isolated. No neighbors, no town lights visible anywhere. If she screamed, no one would hear. Colt parked near the main house and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No traffic, no voices, just wind and the distant sound of the cattle. "Home," he said, climbing out. Delilah sat frozen for a moment, then forced herself to move. Her legs had cramped from the long drive. She stumbled, getting out, caught herself on the truck door. "Careful." Colt was there suddenly, hand on her elbow, not grabbing, just steadying. He let go the second she had her balance. 3 men emerged from the barn, drawn by the sound of the truck. They looked like variations on a theme, weathered, hard, suspicious. Ranch hands, she guessed. The kind of men who survived this life because they were too stubborn or too broken to live anywhere else. "Boys, this is Delilah. She'll be cooking starting tomorrow." Colt's voice carried authority that brooked no argument. "Show her respect or you can find work somewhere else." The men exchanged glances. One, older, with a gray beard and cold eyes, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "She gonna fit in the kitchen?" he asked. The other 2 laughed. Colt didn't. "That's the kind of respect that'll get you fired, Tom." His voice hadn't gotten louder, but something in it changed, went colder, harder. "Try again." Tom's smile died. "Welcome to the ranch, ma'am." "Delilah," she said quietly. "Just Delilah." Colt grabbed her bag and started toward the house. She followed, feeling the eyes of the 3 men boring into her back. This was it. This was her life now, surrounded by men who'd already decided she was a joke, in a place so remote that escape was impossible, working for a stranger who claimed he'd let her leave but owned her for the next 5 years. The house was bigger inside than it looked. Rough-hewn furniture. A fireplace large enough to stand in. Windows that showed nothing but wilderness in every direction. It was clean but sparse, the home of a man who didn't need much or want company. Colt led her up a set of stairs to a second floor she hadn't expected. Opened a door to a room that made her stop breathing. It was bigger than her entire space at the diner. A real bed, full size, not twin. A dresser, a chair by the window, thick curtains, a rug that looked handmade. "Bathroom's down the hall," Colt said, setting her bag on the bed. "Door's got a lock. Use it if you want. My room's on the other end, past the stairs. Kitchen's downstairs, obviously. You can look through it tonight, make a list of what you need. Town runs in 3 days." Delilah just stared at the room. "Something wrong?" he asked. "This is mine?" "Said you'd have your own space." "But it's—" She couldn't finish. Too nice felt ungrateful. Too big felt greedy. She settled on, "It's more than I expected?" Colt shrugged. "Get settled. Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy tonight, just whatever you can throw together from what's in the pantry. Consider it a trial run." He paused at the door. And Delilah? I meant what I said in the truck. You want to leave? You leave. I don't hold people against their will. Then he was gone, boots heavy on the stairs, leaving her alone in a room that felt like a museum exhibit of a life she'd never had. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed carefully, half expecting it to collapse under her weight. It held. She ran her hand over the quilt. Actual handwork, not the cheap manufactured stuff from the diner. She waited for the trap to spring, for Colt to come back with different intentions, for the men outside to make their move, for something to prove this was just a prettier cage. But the house stayed quiet. The sun tracked across the floor, painting everything gold and amber. And slowly, carefully, Delilah let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this could be different. Maybe. She unpacked her bag, hanging her few changes of clothes in a closet that could have held 10 times as much, put her books on the dresser, stood at the window and looked out at mountains that seemed to go on forever. Then she went downstairs to find the kitchen. It was larger than the diner's, better equipped, organized with the kind of efficiency that spoke to someone who actually knew how to cook. Cast iron pans hung from hooks, knives sharp enough to respect, a pantry stocked with basics, flour, salt, dried beans, preserved vegetables. Delilah felt something loosen in her chest. This she knew. This she could do. By 6 o'clock, she had stew simmering and bread in the oven. Nothing fancy, like Colt said, but it was good. She knew it was good. And making it had centered her in a way nothing else could. The men filed in without being called, noses following the smell. They took seats at a long table worn smooth by years of use. Colt sat at the head. The three from earlier, Tom and two younger ones who hadn't been introduced, took the other spots. Delilah served in silence, ladling stew into bowls, cutting thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. She'd learned a long time ago to read a room while working, to gauge reactions without seeming to watch. The first spoonful told her everything. Tom's eyebrows went up despite himself. One of the younger men, sandy-haired, barely 20, made an involuntary sound of satisfaction. Even Colt paused, spoon halfway to his mouth, and something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "This is damn good," the sandy-haired one said. "Language, Jake," Colt said mildly. "Sorry, boss, but it is." Delilah didn't respond, just went back to the kitchen, started cleaning up. She'd learned not to expect compliments directly. They weren't for her anyway. They were for her uncle, her skill, her usefulness. Never her. But through the doorway, she heard Tom's voice, lower now. "She can cook, I'll give you that." "Then I guess the investment paid off," Colt said. Investment, that's what she was. $1,000 investment in better meals. Delilah scrubbed a pot harder than necessary, water scalding her hands. 5 years. She could do 5 years. She'd survived worse. That night, lying in a bed that felt too big and too soft, in a room that felt too safe to be real, Delilah stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what she felt. Not relief. Not yet. Relief required trust, and trust required time. Not hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. But maybe possibility. The possibility that this place, harsh and isolated as it was, might be the first step towards something she'd stopped believing in. Freedom. Outside, wind moved through the pines like breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The mountains held their secrets close, and Delilah Boone was just one more. A woman sold like cattle, brought to the edge of the world, given a room with a lock, and told she could leave any time. She didn't believe it. Not yet. But she'd find out the truth soon enough. The mountains had a way of revealing what people really were, and Delilah had already survived the worst humanity had to offer. Whatever came next, she'd survive that too. She had to. There was nothing else. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and careful distance. Delilah woke before dawn each morning, her body clock still set to diner hours, even though no one had asked her to start that early. The kitchen became her territory by default, the one place where her presence made sense, where her size didn't matter because her hands knew what to do without thinking. She learned the rhythms of the ranch through meals. Breakfast at 5:30, heavy and hot because the men worked physical jobs in thin air that burned calories like kindling. Lunch packed in tin containers they'd carry into the high pastures. Supper at 6 after the animals were fed, and the day's damage assessed. Broken fences, injured cattle, equipment that needed fixing. The work never stopped. Neither did she. Colt kept his distance, which suited her fine. He'd nod when passing through the kitchen, occasionally ask if she needed anything from town. But mostly he existed on the periphery of her awareness, a tall shadow moving between barn and pasture, his voice carrying commands to the men in that flat, emotionless tone that somehow made everyone jump faster than shouting would have. The ranch hands were a different problem. Tom, the gray-bearded one who'd made the crack about her fitting in the kitchen, watched her with undisguised skepticism. Not hostile exactly, but waiting, testing. He'd find small ways to make her life harder, request meals at odd hours, complain the coffee was too weak, then too strong, leave muddy boots right where she'd have to step over them. Delilah ignored it. She'd dealt with worse at the diner. Jake, the sandy-haired kid, was easier. 20 years old and homesick for a place he'd probably never admit missing. He had kind eyes and a habit of thanking her after every meal, like he was surprised anyone would feed him without expecting something in return. He reminded her of a golden retriever, eager to please, quick to forgive, loyal to whoever showed him the smallest bit of kindness. The third man, Marcus, yeah, same name as her uncle, which made her teeth grind, was harder to read. Mid-30s, dark hair, quiet. He never complained about the food, never thanked her either. Just ate with mechanical efficiency and left. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't decode. Not attraction, not disgust. Something else. Calculation, maybe. Like he was trying to figure out what her presence meant for the careful balance of this place. On the 8th day, everything shifted. Delilah was kneading bread dough when she heard the voices outside. Not the usual ranch talk, something sharper. She wiped flour from her hands and moved to the window. Tom and Jake stood in the yard, squared off like fighting dogs. Tom's face had gone red, veins standing out in his neck. Jake's hands were clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with barely contained anger. "Don't know what the hell you're talking about," Jake was saying. "I'm talking about my gear going missing, my good rope, the new gloves I just bought in town." Tom stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. "And suddenly you got new gloves that look awful familiar." "I bought these myself." "With what money? You spent your whole paycheck on whiskey last week." "That's a lie." "Boys," Colt's voice cut through the argument like a knife through butter. He'd appeared from the barn, moving with that unsettling quiet he had. "What's the problem?" Tom turned to him, eager to plead his case. "This little thief's been stealing from me. My rope's gone and he's wearing—" "I didn't steal anything," Jake's voice cracked. "I bought these gloves from Marcus 2 days ago. Tell him, Marcus." Marcus, leaning against the corral fence, watching the whole thing, shrugged. "Sold him gloves. Don't know where they came from originally." "See?" Tom's smile was ugly. "Probably my gloves he bought from you after stealing them." "That doesn't even make sense," Jake protested. Colt looked between them, his face unreadable. "Tom, when's the last time you saw this rope?" 3 days ago. Had it in the tack room. And you're sure it's gone, not just misplaced?" "I know where I keep my gear." "Jake, where'd you get the money for gloves?" "Well," the kid's face went pale. I had some saved." "Thought you spent your paycheck," Marcus said mildly. "I had some saved from before." Jake's desperation was painful to watch. "Boss, I swear I didn't take anything. I wouldn't. You know I wouldn't." Delilah's hands tightened on the windowsill. She did know. Could see it in the way Jake's eyes had gone wet, the way his voice shook. He was telling the truth and no one believed him. Story of her life. She pushed out the back door before she could think better of it. 4 sets of eyes turned to her. Colt's unreadable, Tom's annoyed, Marcus's interested, Jake's surprised. "The rope's in the loft," she said. Silence. "What?" Tom finally said. "Your rope. It's in the hayloft in the barn. North corner, under some loose hay. I saw it yesterday when I was looking for the cat." "What the hell were you doing in the loft?" Tom demanded. "Looking for the cat," she repeated patiently. "She's pregnant. I wanted to make sure she had somewhere warm for when the kittens come. And you just happened to see my rope. It's good rope. Stands out against the hay." Colt was already moving toward the barn. The others followed. Delilah stayed where she was, heart hammering. She'd just inserted herself into ranch business that had nothing to do with her. Stupid. She should have stayed in the kitchen where she belonged. They emerged 5 minutes later. Tom was holding his rope, his face an interesting shade of red. "Found it right where she said," Colt confirmed. "Under loose hay, not exactly stolen." "How'd it get up there?" Tom blustered. "You tell me. You're the one who accused Jake of theft." Tom's jaw worked. He looked at Jake, at the rope, at Delilah. "Must have misplaced it myself. Easy mistake." "Easy mistake that almost got the kid fired," Marcus observed. "I said it was a mistake," Tom snapped. "Apologize to Jake," Colt said quietly. "What? You accused him of being a thief. You were wrong. Apologize." Tom looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Sorry," he muttered in Jake's general direction, and to Delilah. That brought Tom's head up. "Why?" "Because she just saved you from making a decision you'd regret. And because you've been making her life difficult since she got here, and I'm tired of pretending not to notice." Colt's voice hadn't changed, still flat, still emotionless. But something in it made Tom take a step back. "Apologize." "Sorry," Tom said, looking at her this time. Still angry, still resentful, but cowed. Delilah nodded once. Didn't trust her voice. "Get back to work," Colt told them. "All of you." The men scattered. Jake threw her a grateful look before heading toward the pastures. Marcus watched her a moment longer, that calculating expression back, before ambling off. Tom went the opposite direction, shoulders tight with humiliation. Colt remained. Delilah turned to head back inside, but his voice stopped her. "Thank you." She looked back. He was standing in that way he had, perfectly still, watching her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "Didn't do it for thanks," she said. "I know, but you could have stayed quiet, let it play out." "Would have been wrong." "Most people don't care about wrong if it's not their problem." Delilah thought about all the times people had stayed quiet while her uncle humiliated her. All the averted eyes, the uncomfortable silence, the cowardice disguised as minding your own business. "Yeah," she said, "they don't." Something flickered across Colt's face. Not quite approval, more like recognition. "You settling in okay?" "Fine." "Room's comfortable?" "It's more than comfortable." "But?" She hesitated. He waited with that infinite patience he seemed to have for everything except incompetence. "Why do you care?" she finally asked. "I mean, really, you paid $1,000 for a cook. I'm cooking. That should be enough." "Should be," he agreed. "So why ask about the room? Why defend me to Tom? Why any of it?" Colt was quiet for a long moment, gaze drifting toward the mountains. "Because I remember what it's like to be the new person in a place where everyone's already decided who you are. And I remember how much it matters when someone treats you like you're more than what they paid for you." The words hit harder than she expected. There was history there, pain buried so deep it barely showed. But it was there. "Someone bought you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Not exactly, but close enough." He looked back at her. "You're doing good work, Delilah. Don't let Tom make you think otherwise." Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the yard with more questions than answers. That night, Jake knocked on her door after supper. She opened it to find him holding a small carved wooden bird, rough but recognizable. "Made this," he said, shoving it at her, "as thanks for today." She took it carefully. The wood was smooth, the details simple but intentional. A meadowlark, she thought, or close enough. "You didn't have to—" "Yeah, I did. Tom would have gotten me fired. I got nowhere else to go." His voice was thick. "So thank you. Really." After he left, Delilah set the bird on her dresser next to her books. It was the first gift she'd received in years that didn't come with strings attached. The first of anything that felt like it might be the beginning of belonging. Winter came early that year. Not the gentle transition of seasons, but a violent shift. One day cold, the next day brutal. Snow fell in sheets that turned the world white and made the mountains disappear into low-hanging clouds. The temperature dropped so fast that water left in buckets froze solid overnight. The ranch transformed. What had seemed isolated before became completely cut off. The road down to town disappeared under 3 feet of snow. Phone lines went down in the first storm. The men moved between buildings using ropes strung as guides because visibility dropped to nothing during the worst of it. Delilah had never experienced winter like this. Cold in town meant wearing a jacket. Here it meant survival depended on preparation, knowledge, and respect for what the weather could do. Colt had been getting ready for weeks, she realized. The pantry she'd thought was well-stocked was actually packed to capacity. Barrels of flour and sugar, crates of potatoes and onions, preserved vegetables, salted meat, dried beans, coffee in bulk. Enough to feed 5 people for months. "We usually get snowed in for 6 to 8 weeks, he explained during a brief moment in the kitchen. Sometimes longer. Can't rely on getting to town. What if someone gets hurt? Then we deal with it ourselves." He saw her expression and added, "Got medical supplies. Marcus was an army medic. We manage." The casual way he said it made her stomach clench. They were truly on their own up here. No hospital, no help, just 5 people and whatever skills they'd brought with them. The men moved into the main house during the worst of the cold. The bunkhouse had heat, but not enough, and Colt wasn't going to risk someone freezing to death out of stubbornness. They took the downstairs rooms, careful to give Delilah space, but the house suddenly felt crowded in a way it hadn't before. She heard them at night. Tom's snoring, Jake's nightmares that had him gasping awake, Marcus moving around at odd hours, and Colt, always up before everyone else, stoking fires, checking on the animals, making sure the house didn't become a tomb. The work got harder. Keeping everyone fed was one thing. Keeping morale up when cabin fever set in was something else. By the 3rd week of being snowed in, tensions were running high. "This is the same thing you served 2 days ago," Tom complained, pushing his bowl away. Delilah looked at the stew, then at him. "That's because we're rationing. I'm working with what we have. We got plenty of food. We have enough food to last until spring if we're careful. If we're not careful, we run out in February and spend 6 weeks hungry." "I'm already hungry." "Then eat what I made," she said flatly. Tom's eyes narrowed. "You getting smart with me?" "I'm explaining basic math. We have X amount of food and Y amount of time. I'm making X last for Y. Maybe if you ate less, there'd be more for the rest of us." The words landed in dead silence. Jake's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Marcus looked up from his coffee. Even Colt went still. Delilah felt the familiar heat of shame crawl up her neck, but underneath it was something else. Anger. Real anger. Not the swallowed kind she was used to. "You want to talk about food consumption, Tom?" She set down her ladle with deliberate care. "Because I can. I eat 1 meal a day, supper, same portions as everyone else. You eat 3, plus the snacks you've been stealing from the pantry when you think no one's watching. The jerky's going twice as fast as it should, and I found beef stick wrappers in the kindling box." Tom's face went purple. There's a reason I keep the pantry locked now." "Want to guess why? How dare you accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts." She turned to Colt. "You want me to keep us fed through winter, I need everyone to stick to their rations. No exceptions." Colt's gaze moved from her to Tom. "She's right. You're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of not starving." His voice could have frozen water. "You got a problem with rationing. Take it up with the weather. Delilah's doing her job. Start doing yours." Tom shoved back from the table and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Marcus let out a low whistle. "Well, that was interesting." "Sorry," Delilah said quietly. "For what?" Colt asked. "Causing problems." "You didn't cause anything. Tom's been taking food he's not entitled to. That's on him." He picked up his spoon and went back to eating. "Stew's good, by the way." It was the first compliment he'd ever given her food directly. Delilah wasn't sure what to do with it. "Thanks," she managed. Jake grinned at her. "You should have seen your face. Tom looked like he was going to explode." "He still might," Marcus observed. "Let him," Colt said. He settles down or he leaves. Those are his options. But Tom didn't leave. He settled into a cold, simmering resentment that showed in sideways glances and muttered comments just loud enough to hear. He followed the rationing rules now, didn't have a choice with Delilah keeping the pantry locked. But he made sure she knew he hated it, made sure she knew he hated her. Delilah tried not to care, she'd been hated before, but something about the isolation made it worse. In town, she could escape to her room, put distance between herself and the hostility. Here, they were trapped together, every meal, every day, no relief. She started eating in the kitchen instead of at the table, told herself it was easier, that she needed to clean while the food was still hot, that it made sense to separate herself. Really, she just couldn't stand Tom's eyes on her for one more meal. On a night when the wind howled so loud it sounded like the mountain was screaming, Delilah was finishing dishes when Colt appeared in the doorway. She hadn't heard him coming. He moved too quietly for a man his size. "You don't have to eat in here," he said. She didn't look up from the pot she was scrubbing. "Prefer it." Because of Tom. Because it's easier. Easier's not always better. Sometimes it is. He moved into the kitchen, leaned against the counter where she couldn't ignore him. He's been worse since the rationing thing. "Yeah." "You want me to talk to him?" "And say what? Stop being an asshole?" She did look up then. "He already doesn't like me. You defending me just makes it worse." "So what, you just take it?" "I've taken worse." The words came out harder than she meant them to. Colt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That recognition again, like he saw past the surface to the scar tissue underneath. "Your uncle," he said. Not a question. Delilah turned back to the dishes. "I don't want to talk about him." Fair enough. But he didn't leave. Just stood there in that patient way he had, waiting for something she couldn't give him. "Why did you really buy me?" she asked the dishwater. "Told you. Needed a cook." "You could have hired someone, put an ad in the paper, found someone who actually wanted to be here." "Could have," he agreed. "So why didn't you?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because I saw your face when your uncle was selling you. And I remembered being in a room where people were deciding my value. And I thought if I could get you out of there, maybe it'd balance something." Delilah's hand stilled in the water. Balance what? The fact that no one got me out. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. She turned to look at him and found his expression unchanged. Still, that careful blank she was beginning to realize was armor. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "Long time ago. Doesn't matter now." "It matters to you." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Smart. You're smart. People underestimate that because they're too busy judging other things. Yeah, well, fat girls learn to be smart. It's the only currency we've got." "That's bullshit." The bluntness startled her. "Excuse me? You're not valuable because you're smart. You're valuable because you exist. Because you survived 9 years of someone telling you that you weren't. Because you're still standing when most people would have broken." He pushed off the counter. "Tom doesn't matter. What he thinks doesn't matter. You're here because you earned the right to be here the second you didn't quit after the first week." He left before she could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Delilah stood at the sink, hands dripping, heart doing something complicated in her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever suggested her existence alone was enough. She didn't know if she believed it, but part of her, small, desperate, dangerous, wanted to. The storm broke 2 days later. Sun hit the snow and turned everything into blinding white. The men ventured outside to check on the animals, assess damage, start digging out. Delilah took the opportunity to bake. Bread, biscuits, and apple pie from the preserved fruit. The oven's heat was a relief after days of cold, and the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing settled something in her that had been jangling loose. She was pulling the pie from the oven when she heard the commotion outside. Shouting, running feet, something wrong. She dropped the pie on the counter and rushed to the door. Tom and Jake were half carrying Marcus between them, his leg dragging at an odd angle. Blood darkened his pant leg. "What happened?" Colt appeared from the barn, already moving toward them. "Fence broke," Marcus gritted out. "Caught my leg on the wire when I fell." They got him inside. Onto the kitchen table because it was the biggest flat surface. Delilah moved the pie, the cooling bread, everything in the way. Marcus's face had gone gray, sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. Colt cut the pant leg away. The wound was deep, a ragged gash from mid-thigh to knee where barbed wire had torn through skin and muscle. Not arterial, thank God, but bad enough. Delilah, I need hot water, clean towels, the medical kit's in my room, closet on the left. Colt's voice was calm, methodical. Jake, get the whiskey. Tom, hold him still. She moved without thinking, falling into crisis mode the way she had during the diner's rush hours. Hot water from the stove. Every clean towel she could find. The medical kit was military surplus, organized and complete. By the time she got back, Marcus was drinking whiskey straight from the bottle. This is going to hurt, Colt told him. Yeah, I know. It took an hour to clean and close the wound. Marcus passed out halfway through, which was probably for the best. Colt worked with steady hands, stitching like he'd done it 100 times. Probably had. Delilah assisted without being asked, holding skin together, passing instruments, keeping the wound clean. She'd never done anything like this, but she'd watched doctors work in the diner after fights, and her hands were steady. When it was done, they moved Marcus to his room. He came around long enough to swallow the pain medication Colt gave him, then drifted back into unconsciousness. He gonna be okay? Jake asked. He'd gone pale watching the whole thing. If it doesn't get infected, Colt said, we'll watch him, change the dressing twice a day, keep him off the leg for at least a week. That means we're down a man, Tom said, which means the rest of us work harder. Delilah cleaned the blood from the kitchen table, scrubbed until the wood was pristine again. Her hands shook now that the crisis had passed. She'd just helped stitch a man back together on the same surface where she made bread. This place was insane. You did good, Colt said from behind her. She jumped. Stop sneaking up on people. Wasn't sneaking, you were just focused. He took the rag from her hands. Go sit down. I'll finish this. I can... Sit. That's an order. She sat, watched him clean up the last of the blood with efficient movements. When he was done, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. I don't drink, she said. Today you do. The whiskey burned going down. She coughed, eyes watering, but the warmth that spread through her chest was worth it. You ever done that before? Colt asked. Sewn up a person? No. Could have fooled me. I've sewn up plenty of other things. Doesn't seem that different. He smiled, actually smiled, quick and gone, but real. Remind me never to get on your bad side. They sat in silence, drinking whiskey while the sun tracked across the floor. Outside, the world was white and quiet. Inside, a man healed from a wound that could have killed him. Thank you, Colt said eventually, for helping. Couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Would have been harder. Delilah looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried keeping this place running, keeping everyone alive through winters that killed the unprepared. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Someone worse. Yeah. He drained his glass. I get that a lot. Marcus recovered slowly. The wound was clean, no signs of infection, but the pain kept him laid up for 2 weeks. Delilah found herself bringing him meals, changing his bandages while Colt was outside. He never complained, never made it weird, just endured with the kind of stoic patience that came from military training. You're good at this, he said once while she was wrapping fresh gauze around his leg. At what? Taking care of people. She tied off the bandage. It's just feeding and cleaning, not complicated. That's not what I meant. He waited until she looked at him. You see people. Actually see them. That's rare. Delilah didn't know what to say to that. She packed up the medical supplies in silence. He's not going to hurt you, Marcus added. What? Colt. I see you watching him like you're waiting for him to turn into someone else. He won't. You don't know what I'm thinking. Yeah, I do. I had the same look when I first got here. Took me 6 months to believe this place was real. He shifted on the bed, wincing. He saved my life, found me half frozen in a ditch. After I walked away from a VA hospital that couldn't do anything for me except give me pills and paperwork. Brought me here, gave me work, gave me a reason. Why are you telling me this? Because you're still deciding whether to stay or run. And I'm telling you, stay. You'll never find another place like this, another person like him. Delilah left without responding, but the words followed her. By early December, cabin fever was setting in hard. The men were irritable, sick of each other, sick of the cold, sick of the same walls. Delilah felt it too, the weight of isolation pressing down like a physical thing. She started baking more. Cookies, cakes, pastries she didn't have ingredients for, so she made up recipes. It gave her something to do with her hands, and the sweetness seemed to help morale. Jake especially loved it. He'd hover in the kitchen doorway like a hopeful puppy until she gave him whatever was cooling on the rack. "You're going to ruin your dinner," she told him one afternoon. "Don't care. These are amazing." He crammed another cookie in his mouth. "How'd you learn to cook like this?" "Practice. And my mother, before she died." "Oh, sorry." "It was a long time ago. I was 8. Jake looked at her with something like understanding. "That's when your uncle took you in?" "Yeah." "He treat you okay?" The question was so earnest, so genuinely concerned that Delilah almost laughed, almost told him the truth. But what good would it do? "Well enough," she said instead. They both knew it was a lie. Christmas came without ceremony. They didn't have a tree, didn't exchange gifts, just another day of feeding animals and surviving the cold. But Delilah made a special meal, roasted one of the chickens, made stuffing from bread and herbs, baked rolls. It wasn't much, but it was different, and different mattered when every day felt the same. The men ate in silence at first, then Jake raised his glass of water. "To Delilah," he said, "for making this place feel less like hell." Marcus raised his glass. So did Colt. Tom hesitated, then lifted his grudgingly. "To Delilah," they echoed. She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and turned back to the kitchen before they could see her face. That night, lying in bed listening to the wind, Delilah realized something had shifted. She wasn't counting days until spring anymore. Wasn't planning her escape. This place, these people, they were becoming something she hadn't expected. They were becoming hers. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if that terrified her or gave her hope. Maybe both. Probably both. But she was staying. For now, she was staying. January arrived with a cold so vicious it felt personal. The kind that made breathing hurt, that turned exposed skin white in minutes, that killed anything stupid enough to be caught outside unprepared. The thermometer outside the kitchen window stopped registering at -20. After that, the mercury just disappeared into the bottom of the tube like it had given up. Delilah had never known cold could be a living thing, but up here it was. It crept through cracks in the walls, froze the water in this pitcher by her bed, turned the windows into abstract art made of ice crystals. The men kept the fires burning around the clock, but still the house felt like they were living inside a dying breath. On the worst days, they couldn't go outside at all. The animals suffered in the barn, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do about it except hope they survived until the temperature climbed back above 0. Tom paced like a caged animal. His energy turned toxic in the confined space. Marcus read the same 3 books over and over. Jake carved wood until his fingers bled, then kept carving. And Colt watched everything with those dark, unreadable eyes, holding the whole operation together through sheer force of will. Delilah cooked. It was all she could do. 3 meals a day from dwindling supplies, making nothing into something, stretching every ingredient as far as it would go. She'd gotten good at it over the years. Poverty taught you efficiency better than any culinary school, but this was different. This was survival math where mistakes meant hunger, and hunger meant weakness, and weakness meant death. The pressure sat on her chest like a weight. "We're going to run out of flour before spring," she told Colt one morning while he was checking the fires. She kept her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "Maybe mid-February if I'm careful, sooner if I'm not." He looked up from the fireplace, soot on his hands and face. "How much you got left?" 15 pounds, maybe 20 if I scrape the bottom of the barrel. That's enough for bread twice a week through March. If we only eat bread twice a week, then that's what we do." He stood, brushing his hands on his pants. The soot didn't come off, just smeared. What else? She ran through the inventory she'd been keeping in her head. Sugar almost gone, coffee running low. The potatoes were starting to sprout, which meant they were losing nutritional value. Salt was fine. Dried beans would last. The preserved vegetables were holding up, but variety was non-existent. They'd been eating the same things for weeks. We're not going to starve, she finished, but we're going to be hungry and sick of eating the same meals. Can you keep us healthy? Physically? Yeah, probably. Mentally? She gestured toward the main room where Tom was having a one-sided argument with himself. That's harder. Colt almost smiled. Do what you can. That's all anyone can ask. But Delilah wanted to do more than what she could. She wanted to fix this, to make it better, to prove her value beyond just not letting everyone starve. The need surprised her with its intensity. When had she started caring whether these men were happy? When had she started thinking of this place as something worth protecting? She began experimenting, took the sprouting potatoes and made them into something closer to hash. Used coffee grounds twice, then 3 times, stretching the bitter comfort as far as it would go. Made soup from bones she'd normally throw away, boiling them for hours until they gave up every molecule of flavor and nutrition. The men noticed. This is actually pretty good, Jake said one night, looking surprised. He'd been eating what appeared to be a stew made from root vegetables and jerky, somehow transformed into something that didn't taste like desperation. Don't sound so shocked, Delilah said, but there was no heat in it. No, I just mean you're making something out of nothing. It's like magic. It's called being poor. You learn tricks. Marcus looked up from his bowl. My grandmother could do this. Fed 8 kids through the Depression on scraps and willpower. Died swearing she'd never eat another turnip. Yeah, well, we're going to be eating a lot of turnips, Delilah said. So everyone better make peace with that. Even Tom grunted something that might have been acknowledgement. He'd been quieter lately, the cold seeming to leach some of the fight out of him. Or maybe he was just too tired to maintain his hostility. Either way, Delilah wasn't complaining. The snow kept falling. By mid-January, they were buried under what had to be 6 feet, with drifts against the house reaching the second-story windows. The world had shrunk to what they could see from the glass. White and more white. Mountains invisible behind the constant storm. Delilah started having dreams about drowning in milk. She woke one night to voices downstairs, not arguing exactly, but intense. She lay in bed listening, trying to decide if she should be concerned. Can't keep doing this, Tom's voice strained. We're going to lose half the herd. We've already lost some. Colt, matter of fact. Nothing we can do about it. There's got to be something. There isn't. We can't get to them. Even if we could, what would we do? Bring 40 head of cattle into the house? So we just let them die? We survive. That's what we do. The cattle either make it or they don't. A long silence. Then Tom again, quieter now. This is the worst winter I've seen. Yeah. You worried? Another pause. Delilah held her breath. Always, Colt said finally. But worrying doesn't change anything. We work with what we have. And if what we have isn't enough, then we make it enough. The certainty in his voice was almost frightening. Like failure wasn't an option he'd allow the universe to present. Delilah wondered what that kind of confidence cost, what it took to hold that much responsibility without breaking under it. She wondered if he ever wanted to break. The next morning she found him in the kitchen before dawn, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. He looked exhausted. Not just tired, but hollowed out, like he'd been running on nothing but determination for so long he'd forgotten what actual rest felt like. You sleep at all? She asked. He glanced up, unsurprised to see her. Some. That's a lie. Probably. She poured her own coffee, sat across from him. Outside, the first gray light was trying to break through the clouds and failing. How bad is it really? Bad enough. Colt. He looked at her then, and she saw something in his face she hadn't before. Not weakness exactly, but cracks. Places where the armor didn't quite fit anymore. We'll make it to spring, he said, but we're going to be in rough shape when we do. Lost at least 15 head already. Maybe more. Hard to do an accurate count in this weather. Equipment's failing because it's too cold to do proper maintenance. The south pasture fence is down and we can't fix it until the snow melts. What about money? What about it? Do you have enough to replace what you're losing? Colt's laugh was short and bitter. No, but I'll figure something out. Always do. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Delilah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, letting the warmth sink into her palms. She thought about the $1,000 he'd paid for her. Money he apparently couldn't afford to lose. Money he'd spent anyway because he saw something in her face that reminded him of himself. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "There's easier ways to make a living." "Easier isn't always better." "You said that before. What does it mean?" He was quiet for a long time, watching the steam rise from his cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was picking through a minefield of memories. "My father owned this ranch. Built it from nothing, ran it until he died. Left it to me and my brother." He paused. "My brother sold his half to investors who wanted to turn it into some kind of luxury retreat. Fought me for 2 years in court trying to force me to sell the rest. Nearly bankrupted me." "Did you win?" "Technically, kept the land, lost everything else." His jaw tightened. "Including my brother. Haven't spoken to him in 5 years. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a choice. I chose this place over him. Chose the hard way because the easy way meant giving up the only thing I've ever really owned." He looked at her. "That probably doesn't make sense to you." "It makes perfect sense, Delilah said quietly. "I've spent my whole life choosing the hard way because the easy way meant staying somewhere I was slowly dying." Understanding passed between them, silent and complete. Two people shaped by their refusal to take the path of least resistance, even when resistance broke them. "We're a pair," Colt said. "Yeah, we are." He smiled, real and tired and almost sad. "You regretting it yet? Coming here?" Delilah thought about it honestly. Thought about the cold, the isolation, the constant work, the fear that they might not make it through winter. Thought about Tom's hostility and the weight of keeping everyone fed and the fact that she was trapped miles from anywhere with 4 men she barely knew. Thought about the room upstairs that was hers, the respect she'd earned meal by meal, the way Jake looked at her like she was capable of miracles, the way Marcus trusted her with his wound, the way Colt talked to her like an equal, not a possession. "No," she said. "I'm not." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or recognition that he wasn't alone in this impossible thing they were both trying to survive. "Good," he said, "because I'm not regretting buying you either." "I'm not something you bought." "I know. Poor word choice." He stood, drained his coffee. "You're something I invested in. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah. You can waste money. Investments pay back." He headed toward the door, paused. "You're already paying back, Delilah, in case no one's told you." He left her sitting there with those words echoing in her head. By late January, the tension in the house had reached a breaking point. Too many days trapped together, too much cold, too much sameness. The men were snapping at each other over nothing, whose turn it was to stoke the fire, who left the door open too long, who took the last of the coffee. Delilah tried to stay out of it, but she was trapped in the same pressure cooker. Her patience was wearing thin. Her usual ability to swallow irritation and keep moving was fraying at the edges. It all came to a head over beans. "I'm not eating this shit again," Tom said, pushing his plate away. "It's the same thing every night." "Then don't eat," Delilah said flatly. "I'm sick of beans, sick of turnips, sick of this goddamn house." "We're all sick of it, Tom." Marcus's voice was tired. "Complaining doesn't help. Maybe if she put some effort into cooking something different." "With what?" Delilah turned from the stove, wooden spoon still in her hand like a weapon. "You want to tell me what magical ingredients I'm supposed to use? Because I'm working with what we have, and what we have is beans and turnips and your constant bitching." Tom stood up fast enough to knock his chair over. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You'll do what exactly?" The anger that had been building for weeks came pouring out. You've been making my life difficult since I got here, stealing food, making comments, acting like I'm some kind of burden you have to tolerate. I'm done pretending it doesn't bother me. You are a burden. Eating our food, taking up space. I'm feeding you. Her voice cracked. I'm keeping you alive with scraps while you sit around complaining like you're owed something better. You want different food? Go outside and hunt for it yourself. See how long you last in that cold. That's enough. Colt's voice cut through the room like a blade. He'd been sitting quiet at the head of the table, but now he stood. Both of you. She started it, Tom said. I don't care who started it. I'm ending it. He looked at Tom. You got a problem with the food you cook. Otherwise, eat what's in front of you and keep your opinions to yourself. This is bullshit. You always take her side. I take the side of whoever's doing the work. Delilah's been keeping us fed for months on almost nothing. You've been complaining and stealing rations like the rules don't apply to you. Yeah, I'm taking her side. You got a problem with that. Leave. In this weather? That's a death sentence. Then shut up and eat your beans. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Tom's face had gone dark red, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Delilah thought he might actually throw a punch. But Colt just stood there, completely still, and something in his posture said he'd welcome the excuse. Tom looked away first, picked up his chair, sat down and ate his beans without another word. Delilah's hands were shaking. She turned back to the stove before anyone could see, focusing on stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. Her heart was hammering so hard it hurt. She'd never stood up to someone like that. Never let her anger out instead of swallowing it. The rush of it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After dinner, after the men had scattered to their rooms to nurse their various frustrations, Colt found her in the kitchen. You okay? He asked. Fine. That's a lie. Yeah. She set down the plate she'd been washing. I shouldn't have lost my temper. Why not? Because it makes things worse. Does it? Or does it clear the air? Delilah looked at him. He hates me. He hates himself. You're just easier to blame. Colt leaned against the counter. Tom's a good worker when he wants to be, but he's got demons, drinks too much, gets mean when he's frustrated. I keep him around because finding reliable help up here is damn near impossible, but that doesn't mean I like his attitude. So why defend me? Because you were right, and because he needs to learn that being miserable doesn't give him permission to make everyone else miserable too. You think he'll learn that? Probably not, but at least he'll keep it to himself for a while. Delilah almost smiled. You're a cynical man, Colt Maddox. Comes with the territory. He grabbed a towel and started drying dishes she'd washed. She opened her mouth to tell him he didn't have to, then closed it. If he wanted to help, she wasn't going to stop him. They worked in silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of wash and dry, the only sound, the clink of plates, and the wind outside. Can I ask you something? Delilah said eventually. Sure. When you said no one got you out, what did you mean? His hand stilled on the plate he was drying. You don't forget much, do you? Occupational hazard. He set the plate down carefully, like he needed time to decide whether to answer. I was 17 when my father died. My mother had been gone for years, cancer. So it was just me and my brother and this ranch and a mountain of debt I didn't know about because Dad kept the finances close. My brother wanted to sell immediately, said it was the smart move, the practical thing to do. But you didn't want to sell. I wanted to keep the one thing my father built, the one thing that was ours. He picked up another plate, dried it with slow, deliberate movements. Problem was, I was a minor. Couldn't legally own property. My uncle, my father's brother, was supposed to be the trustee until I turned 18. Instead, he tried to push the sale through, said it was for my own good. Delilah could see where this was going. What happened? I fought him, ran the ranch myself while he and my brother went to court trying to force the sale. Worked 20-hour days, learned everything on the fly, nearly killed myself trying to prove I could do it. His voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. Made it to 18 by the skin of my teeth. First thing I did was fire my uncle and buy out my brother's share. Cost me everything I had and everything I could borrow. You won, though. Yeah, Won the right to work myself to death on land that barely makes money, surrounded by people who think I'm crazy for not selling. He looked at her. But it's mine. No one gets to take it. No one gets to tell me I'm too young or too stupid or too stubborn to keep it. So yeah, I won. Delilah understood then. Understood why he'd paid so much for her. Why he let her leave her door locked. Why he defended her against Tom. He knew what it was like to fight for the right to exist on your own terms, and he recognized that fight in her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For getting me out." She swallowed hard. "For giving me a chance to win something too." Colt's expression softened in a way she'd never seen. "You don't have to thank me for basic human decency, Delilah." "Yeah, I do, because it's not as basic as you think." They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a different kind now. Comfortable. Almost peaceful. February came in like a knife to the ribs. If January was brutal, February was cruel. The cold somehow found new depths, the snow kept falling, and the isolation pressed down until Delilah sometimes felt like she was buried alive. The men were ghosts of themselves. Tom had gone silent, which was somehow worse than his complaints. Jake had stopped carving, stopped talking much at all, just moved through his days with mechanical efficiency. Marcus read less, slept more, his injury still bothering him despite being mostly healed. And Colt was everywhere and nowhere, holding the operation together through sheer force of will while slowly burning himself out doing it. Delilah watched him push himself past exhaustion, past sense, and didn't know how to make him stop. He wouldn't listen if she tried. Men like Colt didn't know how to stop until something broke. She just hoped it wouldn't be him. The food situation got worse. The flour ran out in mid-February despite her careful rationing. No more bread, no more biscuits, nothing that required it. They were down to beans, turnips, potatoes, and the last of the preserved meat. Meals became exercises in making nothing taste like something. One night she served what was essentially boiled vegetables with salt. No one complained. They were all too tired to care. "How much longer?" Jake asked quietly. He looked about 15 in the firelight, young and scared. 6 weeks until spring, Colt said. "Maybe 8? We gonna make it?" "Yeah." "You sure?" The Colt looked at the kid with something approaching gentleness. "Yeah, Jake. We're gonna make it." Delilah hoped he was right. 2 days later, the weather broke. Not permanently. It was still February in the high country, but enough that the temperature climbed above zero and the sun came out for the first time in weeks. It felt like a miracle. Colt and the men ventured outside to assess the damage. Delilah watched from the window as they dug through snowdrifts, checked on the animals, surveyed what winter had destroyed. They lost more than half the herd. Equipment was damaged beyond repair. Fences were down. The barn roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. She heard Colt's voice carrying across the yard, flat and final. "We'll rebuild." Always rebuilding. Always pushing forward, never admitting defeat. That night, he sat at the kitchen table doing math on paper. Income versus loss. Debt versus survival. His expression got darker with every number. "It's bad," he said when he noticed her watching. "How bad?" "Bad enough that selling might actually be the smart move." Delilah's stomach dropped. "You're not serious." "I'm serious about being realistic. Lost over half my herd. That's my income for the year gone. Insurance won't cover most of it. Bank's already breathing down my neck about the loans." He set down his pencil. "I might not have a choice." "There's always a choice. Not always a good one." She sat across from him, looked at the numbers. They were bad. Worse than bad, but not impossible. "What if we found another income stream?" she asked. "Like what?" "I don't know, something using what we have, what we're good at. We're good at ranching, kind of hard to do without cattle." "What else? There's got to be something." Colt leaned back, rubbing his face. "The land's worth something. Timber, maybe. Hunting leases. But all that takes time and money to set up, and I've got neither." Delilah thought about it. Thought about what she knew, what she could do. Thought about the one skill she had that had value anywhere. "What about food?" she said slowly. "What about it?" "People will pay for good food, especially up here where options are limited. What if she was working it out as she spoke? What if we turn part of the ranch into a destination? Like a restaurant, but remote, exclusive. People come up for the experience. Colt stared at her. You want to run a restaurant out of a ranch that's barely surviving winter? I want to use what we have. You've got land, location, a story. I can cook. That's worth something. To who? We're in the middle of nowhere. To people who want to escape somewhere. Rich people from the city who want to pretend they're frontiersmen for a weekend. Hunters, tourists, anyone looking for something different. She was getting excited now, ideas flowing faster than she could articulate them. You charge premium prices because it's exclusive, limited seating, reservation only. Make it special. That's insane. Maybe, but it's an option. He looked at her like he was seeing someone new. You've really thought about this? No, I'm making it up as I go, but tell me it couldn't work. I can't tell you that. He laughed, surprised and genuine. I can't tell you that because it actually might work. They stayed up late planning, throwing ideas back and forth, building something out of desperation and possibility. It was probably crazy, definitely risky, but it was a chance, and a chance was better than accepting defeat. By the time they went to bed, the sun was already starting to rise. Delilah lay in her room, exhausted but wired, staring at the ceiling. She'd just proposed a business idea to a man who'd bought her 6 months ago. She'd just tried to save a ranch that wasn't hers. She'd just done something that felt dangerously close to caring about her future in this place. When had that happened? When had survival turned into investment? She didn't have answers. But lying there in the pre-dawn light, listening to the house settle around her, Delilah realized something important. She wasn't planning her escape anymore. She was planning to stay. Spring didn't arrive so much as winter finally gave up its grip. The thaw came in March, slow and grudging, ice melting into mud that swallowed boots and made every step treacherous. The road down to town became passable for the first time in 4 months, though passable was generous. More like survivable if you had a decent truck and didn't mind risking your life on switchbacks slick with runoff. Colt made the trip alone, taking a list Delilah had written of supplies they desperately needed, and a head full of plans that seemed less crazy in daylight, but no less risky. He came back 3 days later with flour, coffee, fresh vegetables that made Delilah's hands shake when she unpacked them, and news. Talked to some people in town, he said, unloading sacks from the truck bed. Business owners mostly, mentioned the idea about turning this place into a destination. Delilah's stomach clenched. What'd they say? That I was out of my mind. He hauled a crate of potatoes toward the house. Also that it might work. Tourism's picking up in the area. Rich folks from Denver and beyond looking for authentic experiences, whatever that means. Did you talk to anyone who might actually come up here? Talked to a guy who runs a booking service for luxury experiences. Hunting trips, wilderness tours, that kind of thing. Colt set the crate down, straightened with a grimace. His back was bothering him again. Too many nights sleeping poorly, too many days pushing his body past its limits. He said if the food's as good as I claimed, he could send clients, but they'd expect certain standards. What kind of standards? The kind that cost money we don't have. Of course, nothing was ever simple. They spent the next week taking inventory of what they had versus what they'd need. The main house was solid but rough, fine for ranch hands, not fine for people paying premium prices. The furniture was functional but worn. The bathroom situation was primitive. The whole place screamed working ranch, not exclusive retreat. We'd need to fix up at least 3 guest rooms, Delilah said, walking through the second floor with Colt. New mattresses, definitely. Actual curtains instead of whatever these are. Maybe some rugs. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable. That's $5,000 minimum, and that's if we do most of the work ourselves. What about the barn? Could we convert part of it into dining space? Colt looked at her like she'd suggested building a rocket ship. The barn. It's got good bones, high ceilings. If we cleaned it up, added some tables, made it feel intentional instead of accidental, it could work. Rustic but elevated. Give people the ranch experience without making them eat in a bunkhouse. He walked to the window, stared out at the barn in question. The roof was still partially collapsed from winter. Half the doors hung crooked. It looked like a strong wind might finish what the snow started. You're talking about a lot of work, he said. Yeah. Money we don't have. Yeah. On an idea that might not work. Yeah. She moved to stand next to him. But what's the alternative? Sell the ranch and spend the rest of your life wondering if you gave up too soon? I've spent 9 years wondering what would have happened if I'd fought back instead of just surviving. I don't recommend it. Colt was quiet for a long moment, then, when did you get so brave? The question caught her off guard. I'm not brave. You proposed a business plan to save a ranch you don't own. You stood up to Tom when most people would have kept their head down. You survived a winter that broke grown men. He looked at her. That's brave. That's desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing. Delilah didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that desperation had been her constant companion so long it felt like bravery only because she'd run out of other options. But looking at Colt, seeing the exhaustion and determination in equal measure, she realized he understood anyway. We'll need help, she said finally. Can't do this with just the 5 of us. I know. Problem is, hiring people costs money. What if we offered equity instead? A stake in the business if it works. Who's going to take that deal? It's a huge risk. People who don't have better options. People like us. The idea took root slowly. Over the next few days, Colt reached out to contacts he'd made over years of ranching, people who'd worked for him before, people who owed him favors, people who were desperate or brave or stupid enough to take a chance on something that probably wouldn't work. 2 people said yes. The first was a woman named Sarah, 40-something with carpenter skills, and a nasty divorce that left her broke and looking for escape. She'd done construction work in town until the jobs dried up, and the prospect of steady work plus potential ownership was enough to get her up the mountain. The second was a kid named Danny, 19 and fresh out of a situation he wouldn't talk about, but that left shadows in his eyes, Delilah recognized. He didn't have skills beyond basic labor, but he was willing to learn and work for almost nothing, plus room and board. This is insane, Tom said when Colt announced the plan to the ranch hands. You're going to turn this place into some kind of resort? Restaurant, Delilah corrected. With lodging. Same difference, and you think people are going to trek up here to eat beans and turnips? They're going to trek up here to eat food they can't get anywhere else, she said. Made from ingredients we raise or grow or hunt. Authentic, local, exclusive. Tom snorted. Authentic. That's rich people talk for pretending to be poor. Maybe, Marcus said, speaking up for the first time. But if rich people want to pay premium prices to pretend, I'm not going to complain. You're all crazy. Probably, Colt agreed. But we're doing it anyway. You in or out? Tom looked around the table, at Colt's set jaw, at Delilah's determined expression, at Marcus and Jake watching him with barely concealed hope that he wouldn't ruin this for everyone. In, he said finally. But when this falls apart, I'm saying I told you so. Fair enough. They started work the next day. Sarah turned out to be worth her weight in gold. She looked at the barn, the house, the whole operation with a contractor's eye and made a list of what was essential versus what was wishful thinking. They couldn't afford wishful thinking, so they focused on essential. Barn first. They spent 2 weeks just clearing debris, shoring up the structure, replacing the collapsed section of roof. It was brutal work. Heavy lifting in thin air, splinters and sawdust, muscles screaming. But slowly, the space began to transform. It's actually starting to look like something, Jake said one afternoon, standing back to survey their progress. They'd cleared enough space for what could be a dining area, rough but solid. Don't jinx it, Sarah warned. She was up on a ladder, securing new beams. Her arms were stronger than most men's, her hands scarred from years of physical labor. We've still got a month of work before this is even close to functional. Month and a half, Colt corrected. And that's if nothing else breaks. Something always broke. A week into barn renovations, the well pump died. 2 days after that, they discovered rot in the main house's east wall that needed immediate attention or the whole structure was at risk. Then a late spring storm, because of course there was a late spring storm, undid 3 days of roofing work in 3 hours. Delilah watched the money Colt had scraped together disappear into emergency repairs, and felt her stomach clench with anxiety. They were bleeding funds with no guarantee of return, betting everything on an idea she'd proposed out of desperation. What if she was wrong? What if this failed and Colt lost the ranch because she'd convinced him to throw good money after bad? "Stop spiraling," Marcus said one evening. He'd found her in the kitchen, stress-baking bread they didn't need because her hands needed something to do. "I'm not spiraling. You've made 4 loaves in 2 hours. That's spiraling." She punched down dough harder than necessary. "What if this doesn't work?" "Then it doesn't work. We tried. That's more than most people can say. That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be true." He grabbed a piece of bread she'd already baked, tore off a chunk. "You know what the difference is between you and most people?" "What?" "Most people have the idea and never do anything about it. You had the idea and you're fighting for it. Win or lose, that matters. Tell that to Colt when he's signing foreclosure papers." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "He knows the risks. He's choosing this anyway. That's not on you." But it felt like it was on her. The weight of it sat on her chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. Still, she kept working. Because what else was there to do? While the men focused on structural repairs, Delilah and Sarah started planning the actual dining experience. What would the space look like? How many people could they realistically serve? What was the story they were selling? "People don't just pay for food," Sarah said. She was sketching rough layouts on paper, her handwriting surprisingly neat. "They pay for an experience, a story they can tell their friends." "So what's our story?" Survival, authenticity. A woman who learned to cook in her uncle's diner and turned it into something extraordinary in the harshest conditions imaginable. Delilah looked up sharply. "I'm not the story." "You absolutely are. A plus-size woman running a kitchen in the mountains, feeding people who came here to test themselves. That's compelling. That's different. That's exploitative. Only if you feel exploited. Do you?" Did she? Delilah thought about it. Thought about years of being invisible, mocked, dismissed. Thought about the power of choosing to be seen instead of hiding. "No," she said slowly. "I don't." "Then let's use it. Make you part of the brand. The food's already going to be incredible. I've eaten enough of your cooking to know that, but add your story and you've got something people will drive hours to experience." It felt dangerous, vulnerable, like exposing herself to the same judgment she'd spent her life avoiding. But also, maybe, like taking back power from people who'd used her appearance against her for years. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not doing some sob story thing. I'm not the poor fat girl who got saved. No. You're the brilliant cook who survived winter in the high country and turned a dying ranch into something people will pay to experience." Sarah grinned. "Much better story." By late April, the barn was functional. Not beautiful, but functional. Long tables made from reclaimed wood Sarah had salvaged from the collapsed section. Benches instead of chairs because they were cheaper and fit the aesthetic. Simple place settings. The whole space smelled like pine and sawdust and possibility. "It needs something," Jake said, standing in the center of the room. "Feels empty still." "Lights," Delilah said. "String lights overhead. Not too many, just enough to make it feel warm when it's dark." "Where are we going to get string lights, Gichamats?" Tom asked. "I saw some in town that weren't too expensive. We could—" "I'll handle it," Colt interrupted. He'd been quiet most of the day, watching them work, calculating costs in his head. "What else?" They made a list. Linens, dishes, glasses, serving pieces, basic necessities that added up fast. Colt looked at the numbers and his expression went tight, but he didn't say no. "We'll make it work," was all he said. The first test dinner happened on a Wednesday in early May. Not for paying customers. They weren't ready for that yet. But for the booking agent Colt had talked to in town, a man named Richard who'd driven up with his wife to see if the operation was legitimate or just a rancher's pipe dream. Delilah had been preparing for 3 days. She'd hunted through the property for wild ingredients, ramps growing near the creek, morel mushrooms in the burned-over section of forest, early greens she could identify from books Sarah had borrowed from the town library. Combined with what they had in the pantry and fresh supplies from town, she built a menu that told a story. First course, wild green salad with a simple vinaigrette, served with bread she'd baked that morning. Second course, trout caught from the stream that ran through the property, pan-fried with ramps and fresh herbs. Third course, venison roast, from a deer Marcus had shot the week before, slow-cooked until it fell apart, served with root vegetables that had survived winter in the cellar. Dessert, apple tart made from the last of the preserved fruit, flaky crust that took her 3 attempts to get right. Simple food. Honest food. The kind that showed respect for ingredients and skill without trying to be something it wasn't. Richard and his wife arrived at 6. They were exactly what Delilah expected. City people dressed in expensive outdoor wear that had never seen actual outdoor work. The kind who paid to experience hardship for a few hours before returning to comfort. But she didn't judge them. Their money was as good as anyone's. Colt greeted them, showed them around the property. Delilah watched from the barn kitchen. They'd set up a temporary cooking space until they could build a proper one, and tried to control her breathing. This was it. The test. Everything hinged on the next 2 hours. "You got this," Sarah said quietly. She'd volunteered to help serve, along with Jake. "What if I don't?" "Then we figure out plan B. But you got this." Richard and his wife entered the barn, and Delilah heard the wife's small gasp. The string lights Jake had hung, he'd made a late-night run to town on his own dime to get them, cast warm pools of light across the space. The tables gleamed from Sarah's careful sanding and oiling. Simple wildflowers sat in mason jars as centerpieces. It looked rustic but intentional. Rough but beautiful. The woman smiled. First good sign. Delilah served the salad herself, hands steady through sheer force of will. Set the plates down with quiet confidence she didn't feel. "This is lovely," Richard's wife said, looking at the greens. "Where did you source these?" "From the property," Delilah said. "About a quarter-mile from here, growing wild near the creek." "Really?" The woman looked genuinely delighted. "That's amazing." Delilah retreated to the kitchen and waited. Heard the sounds of eating, quiet conversation. Couldn't make out words, but the tone seemed positive. The trout course went out, then the venison. Between each course, Delilah listened. Tried to gauge reaction from small sounds, from the speed at which plates came back empty or half full. They came back empty. By the time she served dessert, her shirt was soaked with nervous sweat despite the cool evening air. This was worse than cooking for 100 people at the diner. This mattered in a way that work had never mattered before. She brought out the tart herself, needed to see their faces. Richard took a bite and his eyebrows went up. His wife made a small sound of pleasure. "This is exceptional," Richard said, looking at Delilah directly for the first time all evening. "Truly exceptional. Where did you train?" "A roadside diner in a town you've never heard of." He laughed, surprised. "Seriously?" "Seriously." "Well, you're wasted in a diner." He set down his fork. "Colt told me about your idea here. I'll be honest, I thought it was a long shot. But this," he gestured at the empty plates. "This could work. This could really work." Delilah felt something unclench in her chest. "You think people would pay to come up here?" "I think people would pay a premium to come up here. The food's incredible. The setting's unique. The story's compelling." He pulled out a business card, handed it to Colt. "I can get you bookings. Not a lot at first, but enough to start. You'll need to get properly licensed, sort out insurance, all the boring legal stuff. But yeah, I can work with this." After they left, promising to be in touch, the 5 of them stood in the barn in stunned silence. "Did that just happen?" Jake asked. "I think it did," Marcus said. Tom shook his head. "I'll be damned. It might actually work." Colt looked at Delilah. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected. "No." His voice was firm. "This was your idea, your vision, your food. We just helped." The weight of his words settled over her. For the first time since arriving at this ranch, since being sold like livestock, since starting to believe she might have value beyond what people could take from her, for the first time Delilah felt something close to pride. Not the performance of pride to convince others. Real pride. Earned pride. It felt foreign and fragile and absolutely terrifying. "So what now?" Sarah asked. "Now we get ready," Colt said. Because if Richard sends clients, we need to be ready to deliver. Every time. No mistakes. They spent the next month in a frenzy of preparation. Sarah finished the guest rooms, simple but clean, with new mattresses and linens that felt luxurious against skin used to worn cotton. Danny helped build a proper kitchen in the barn, with enough space for Delilah to work efficiently. They got licensed, insured, inspected by more officials than seemed necessary for an operation this remote. The first official booking came in June. A group of 4 from Denver, wealthy professionals looking for a unique weekend experience. They'd paid twice what Delilah expected for a single dinner. "Jesus, what?" she said when Colt showed her the reservation. "That's the going rate for this kind of thing, apparently. People are insane. People have money and want experiences. We're providing both." He looked at her. "You ready?" Was she? Delilah thought about the girl who'd stood in her uncle's diner 6 months ago, being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Thought about the journey from there to here, from being someone's burden to being someone's hope. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." The dinner was perfect. The guests raved. More bookings came in. By July, they were serving dinner 3 nights a week to carefully managed groups. The money wasn't flooding in, but it was steady, enough to cover expenses, enough to make loan payments, enough to suggest this crazy idea might actually sustain itself. Delilah worked harder than she ever had, but it was different now. She wasn't working to survive someone else's demands. She was working to build something that was partially hers. Colt had made it official in May, drawing up papers that gave her a stake in the business. Not charity, partnership. "You earned it," he'd said when she tried to protest. "And you'll keep earning it. This thing doesn't work without you." The summer brought challenges she hadn't anticipated, serving wealthy guests who sometimes treated her like hired help instead of an owner, managing inventory for unpredictable bookings, dealing with critics who couldn't believe good food came from someone who looked like her. But it also brought victories. A review in a Denver magazine that called her cooking revelation disguised as simplicity. A couple who came back 3 times in 2 months. A woman who cried over the venison course and told Delilah it reminded her of her grandmother's cooking. Those moments made everything worth it. One evening in late August, after a particularly grueling service, Delilah sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air had started to turn cool again, fall coming early like it always did up here. In a few months, they'd be snowed in again, but this time felt different. This time, she'd be here by choice. Colt joined her, carrying his own cup. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from months of working side by side, making impossible things happen through stubbornness and skill. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret what?" "Staying. Could have left in spring when the roads cleared. Could have taken your wages and started over somewhere else." Delilah thought about it honestly. "No, I don't regret it. Even though it's been brutal? Especially because it's been brutal. Easy things don't mean anything." She looked at him. "You taught me that." He smiled, tired but genuine. "Pretty sure you already knew it." They watched the mountains turn purple in the fading light, and Delilah realized she'd stopped thinking of this place as temporary, stopped planning escape routes, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd started thinking of it as home. The word felt strange, dangerous, like saying it out loud might make it disappear. But sitting there next to Colt, watching the land they'd fought to save settle into evening, Delilah let herself believe in it anyway. Home. Worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around, even if that life looked nothing like what she'd imagined, maybe especially because of that. September brought the kind of mornings that made Delilah understand why people wrote poetry about fall in the mountains. The air turned crisp enough to see her breath. The aspen groves transformed into rivers of gold running down the mountainsides, and the sky stretched so blue and endless it almost hurt to look at. It also brought trouble in the form of 3 men in expensive suits who arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. Delilah was in the kitchen prepping for that evening service when she heard the unfamiliar vehicle pull up. Through the window, she watched a sleek black SUV park next to Colt's battered truck. The contrast was almost comical. 3 men climbed out, looking around the property with expressions that made her stomach clench. They weren't here to eat. Colt met them in the yard. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read his body language, the way his shoulders went tight, the way he crossed his arms, defensive. After 10 minutes, he brought them inside. One of the men was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses, not physical labor. The other two were younger, lawyers probably, carrying briefcases and radiating hostile professionalism. "Delilah, this is Preston Maddox," Colt said, his voice carefully neutral. "My brother." The words landed like a punch. Preston looked at her with barely concealed disdain, his gaze sweeping her body in the way she'd learned to recognize, cataloging, judging, dismissing. "Charmed," he said, though his tone suggested he was anything but. "What brings you up here?" Delilah asked, keeping her voice level. "Family business," Preston said. "Nothing that concerns you." "If it concerns Colt, it concerns me." Preston's eyebrow went up. He looked at Colt. "Really? You're taking business advice from the help now?" "She's not the help," Colt said quietly. "She's my partner." The word hung in the air. Partner. Delilah felt something warm bloom in her chest, even as Preston's expression turned incredulous. "Your partner," Preston repeated. "In what exactly?" "The restaurant, the ranch, all of it." Colt gestured toward the barn. "We're running a legitimate operation here, profitable, growing, sustainable." "Oh, I've heard about your little dinner theater." Preston's smile was sharp. "Very quaint, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem. You're still drowning in debt on property that's worth more than you can ever make cooking for tourists." "What do you want, Preston?" "I want to help you. I found buyers, serious buyers, who are willing to pay top dollar for this land. Enough to clear your debts, give you a fresh start, let you stop playing cowboy, and actually make something of yourself." "I am making something of myself." "You're barely surviving. You lost half your herd last winter, your mortgage to the gills. And for what? Pride? Stubbornness?" Preston shook his head. "Dad would be ashamed." Delilah saw Colt flinch, saw the words hit home in a way nothing else had. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Your father built this ranch from nothing," she said. "Spent his life making it work despite every obstacle. Sounds to me like Colt's doing exactly what his father would have wanted." Preston turned to her slowly. "I'm sorry, who are you again?" "Delilah Boone, co-owner." "Co-owner?" He laughed, sharp and cruel. "Let me guess. You're one of those feel-good stories. Colt found you in some diner, brought you up here, and now you think you've earned a stake in property that's been in our family for 3 generations? I've earned my stake through 8 months of work that helped save this place from foreclosure. How noble. But the adults are talking now, so why don't you run along back to your kitchen?" "Preston," Colt's voice cut like a whip, "you don't talk to her like that. I'll talk to whoever I want, however I want. This is family business." "She's family." The word stopped Preston mid-sentence, stopped Delilah's breath in her throat. Colt looked at her when he said it, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. Then he turned back to his brother. "You gave up your right to decide anything about this ranch 5 years ago when you tried to force me to sell. I bought you out. This place is mine. Mine and Delilah's, and we're not selling. You're making a mistake. It's my mistake to make." Preston's expression hardened. "Fine. But when this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me for help." He gestured to his lawyers. "We're done here." They left in a spray of gravel, the SUV disappearing down the mountain road like a bad dream retreating in daylight. Colt stood in the yard for a long moment after they were gone, staring at nothing. Delilah joined him, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," she finally offered. "For what?" "For making it worse. I shouldn't have engaged with him." "You didn't make anything worse. Preston's been looking for an excuse to come up here and gloat since he heard about the restaurant." Colt's jaw was tight. "He wants me to fail. Always has." "Why?" "Because if I succeed, it means he was wrong to give up. Means he chose money over something that mattered, and he can't live with that." He turned to look at her. "I meant what I said about you being family." Delilah's throat went tight. "Colt, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other less than a year, but you fought for this place harder than anyone I've ever known. You've earned your place here. That's not what family means, isn't it? I've got a brother who shares my blood and wants me to fail. I've got you, no blood relation, who works 18-hour days to make sure we succeed. Tell me which one's really family. She didn't have an answer for that, didn't trust her voice to work if she tried to speak. I don't know what this is, Colt continued, gesturing between them. This thing we're building, but it matters to me, you matter to me, and I need you to know that. The confession sat in the air between them, vulnerable and honest in a way that made Delilah want to run and stay in equal measure. Part of her, the part that had learned early that people only wanted her for what she could give them, screamed that this was manipulation, control dressed up as care. But looking at Colt's face, seeing the genuine uncertainty there, she didn't believe that. You matter to me too, she said quietly. This place matters to me. I don't know what that means either, but it's true. That's enough, Colt said. For now, that's enough. That evening's service was tense. Delilah couldn't stop thinking about Preston's words, about the casual cruelty in his dismissal, about the fact that people would always see her as less because of how she looked. She burned a sauce she'd made 100 times, had to throw it out and start over, the clock ticking down to when guests would arrive. You okay? Sarah asked, watching her work with more intensity than the task required. Fine. That's a lie. Yeah, well, lying's easier than explaining. Sarah leaned against the counter. The guy in the suit got to you. He didn't. He did. I saw your face. What did he say? Delilah kept her hands moving, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. The usual, that I don't belong here, that I'm playing pretend with things I don't understand, that I'm the help trying to be something more. And you believe him. Part of me does. Which part? The part that spent 9 years being told I was worthless. The part that knows how I look. The part that remembers being sold like livestock 8 months ago. She set down the knife before she hurt herself. I've spent my whole life being invisible or being a joke. Now I'm neither, and I don't know how to trust it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what I see when I look at you? What? Someone who took the worst thing that ever happened to them and turned it into power. Someone who didn't just survive, they conquered. You're not invisible anymore, Delilah. You made yourself impossible to ignore. That's exactly what you did. You built a business from scraps. You saved a ranch that was dying. You made yourself essential to something bigger than one person's opinion of your body. Sarah's voice was firm. Preston Maddox can think whatever he wants, but he's wrong. And deep down, I think you know that. Delilah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the voice in her head that said she didn't deserve this was lying. Maybe belief was a choice you made every day until it became real. The guests arrived at 7, a party of 6 from California, tech industry people with too much money and a hunger for experiences that felt authentic. Delilah served them course by course, her hands steady even though her mind was still churning. By the third course, elk she'd prepared with a cherry reduction that took 3 days to perfect, the table had gone quiet in the way that meant she'd won them over. People didn't make small talk when the food demanded their full attention. After service, one of the women approached her in the kitchen. That was extraordinary, she said. Genuinely one of the best meals I've ever had, and I've eaten at some of the best restaurants in the world. Thank you. I'm serious. You're wasted up here. You should be in San Francisco, New York, somewhere people could actually appreciate what you're doing. The words were meant as a compliment. Delilah knew that, but they hit wrong anyway. People appreciate it here, she said carefully. Sure, but the audience is so limited. You could be famous. I don't want to be famous. I want to cook good food for people who'll eat it, in a place that's mine. The woman looked puzzled, like the concept of choosing this over fame made no sense. Well, if you ever change your mind, I know people. After she left, Delilah stood in the kitchen and let herself feel the weight of the day, the judgment, the doubt, the constant assessment of her worth based on what she could do for other people. Colt found her there an hour later, staring at a cutting board she'd cleaned 3 times already. Good service tonight, he said. Yeah, but I'm tired. She set down the rag she'd been holding. Tired of proving myself, tired of people looking at me and seeing either a joke or a project. Tired of wondering if I actually belong here or if I'm just convenient. You belong here. How do you know? Because this place is better with you in it. Because I'm better with you in it. He moved closer, not crowding her, but making his presence solid, real. And because you chose to stay when you could have left, that's not convenience, that's commitment. Delilah looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried trying to keep everything together, the vulnerability it took for a man like him to admit he needed someone. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared that this is all going to fall apart. Scared that I'll wake up and it'll be like the diner again, trapped and powerless and hating myself. It won't be. You can't promise that. You're right, I can't promise nothing will ever go wrong. But I can promise that if it does, we'll face it together. That's what partners do. The word again, partner, equal. Someone whose voice mattered as much as his. Delilah had never had that. Had never even imagined it as possible. I don't know how to be someone's partner, she said. I only know how to survive on my own. Then we'll learn together, because I don't know how to be someone's partner either. I've spent 5 years running this place alone, convinced that asking for help was weakness. He smiled, tired but genuine. Turns out it's not weakness, it's just smart. Something shifted in Delilah's chest. Not resolution. She wasn't naive enough to think one conversation fixed years of damage. But possibility. The smallest opening toward believing she might deserve what she was building. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, we learn together. Colt's smile widened. Then slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm, solid, real. Together, he agreed. They stood like that for a long moment, hands linked, the kitchen quiet around them. Outside, the mountains held their secrets and the night pressed close. But inside this space they'd built from nothing, Delilah felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. October brought the first snow of the season and a letter from Preston's lawyers. They were contesting Delilah's ownership stake, claiming Colt had given away family property without proper legal authority. It was clearly harassment. The paperwork was solid. Sarah had made sure of that, but it meant time and money they didn't have fighting a battle that shouldn't exist. He's not going to stop, Marcus said, reading over the legal documents. Your brother. He's going to keep pushing until something breaks. Then we don't break, Colt said simply. But Delilah could see the strain on him. The late nights going over finances, the tension in his shoulders, the way he pushed himself even harder to make sure the ranch stayed profitable enough that Preston couldn't claim failure. She wanted to fix it, wanted to find some solution that would make the threat disappear. The answer came from an unexpected source. Richard, the booking agent, called in early November with a proposition. A food magazine out of Denver wanted to do a feature on the restaurant, full spread, professional photos, the works. It would cost them nothing and the exposure would be massive. There's a catch though, Richard said over the phone. They want the human interest angle. Your story, Delilah. How you went from a diner to this. Delilah's stomach dropped. No. It's good publicity. I said no. My story's not for sale. She hung up before he could argue, then stood in the kitchen trying to control her breathing. The idea of strangers reading about her humiliation, her uncle's cruelty, the auction, it made her skin crawl. You should do it, Sarah said from the doorway. Absolutely not. Hear me out. Preston's trying to paint you as someone who doesn't belong, who's taking advantage of Colt. A story that shows the truth, that you built this place with your own hands, that kills his narrative. I'm not exposing myself like that for strategy. Then do it for yourself. Take back your story from everyone who's ever used it against you. Tell it your way, on your terms. Delilah wanted to refuse, wanted to keep her past buried where it couldn't hurt anymore. But Sarah was right. Her silence gave other people power to define her. Her story was hers, the pain, the survival, the triumph. Why should she let shame keep her from claiming it? I'll think about it, she said. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she called Richard back and said yes. The journalist who came up was a woman named Kate, late 30s, sharp eyes, but kind. She spent 2 days at the ranch, watching Delilah work, asking questions, taking notes. Some of the questions hurt to answer, about her uncle, about the auction, about the years of cruelty disguised as care, but Kate listened without judgment, wrote it down without sensationalizing. And when she asked Delilah what she wanted people to understand, Delilah knew exactly what to say. I want people to know that being underestimated isn't the same as being powerless. That survival is its own kind of strength, and that the things people use to dismiss you, your size, your background, your scars, those same things can become your foundation if you refuse to be ashamed of them. The article came out 2 weeks before Christmas. Delilah couldn't bring herself to read it at first, terrified of seeing her pain reduced to entertainment. But when she finally did, she found something different. Kate had written about resilience, about choosing to build instead of break, about a woman who turned rejection into empire through skill and refusal to accept other people's limitations. The photos showed Delilah in her kitchen, commanding the space with confidence the photographer had somehow captured. She looked powerful. She looked like she belonged. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The magazine's website crashed from traffic. Reservation requests flooded in faster than they could process. News outlets wanted interviews. Other restaurants wanted to know her techniques. And Preston's lawyers suddenly went quiet. Hard to claim someone was an undeserving interloper when a respected magazine was calling them a culinary force. "You did it," Colt said, showing her the reservation book. They were booked solid through spring, with a waiting list that kept growing. "We did it," Delilah corrected. "No, this was you, your courage, your story." He looked at her with something that made her breath catch. "I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than she expected. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever looked at her accomplishments and felt pride instead of surprise. "Thank you," she managed. That night, after service, Colt asked her to walk with him. They bundled up against December cold and headed up the ridge behind the house, their breath-forming clouds in the freezing air. The stars were violent in their brightness, the kind of sky you only got in places where light pollution didn't exist. At the top of the ridge, Colt stopped. "I brought you up here to show you something," he said. "What?" "This." He gestured at the valley below, the ranch buildings with smoke rising from chimneys, the barn with its warm lights, the mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. "This is what we built, together." Delilah looked at the view and felt something break open in her chest. A year ago, she'd been standing in a diner being auctioned off, invisible and powerless. Now she stood on a mountain she co-owned, looking down at an empire she'd helped create from scraps and determination. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yeah." But Colt was looking at her when he said it. "Listen, I know this might be too fast. I know we've only known each other a year, but I need to tell you something." Her heart started hammering. "Okay. I'm in love with you." The words hung in the frozen air between them. "I think I've been in love with you since you stood up to Tom that first week, since you fought for Jake, since you proposed saving this place when anyone else would have left. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you." He paused. "If you'll have me." Delilah couldn't speak. Tears were freezing on her face, but she didn't care. "You don't have to answer now," Colt said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that this isn't about convenience or business or any of that. This is about you. About us." "I love you too," she said, and saying it felt like jumping off a cliff. Terrifying and freeing in equal measure. "I didn't think I could. Didn't think I was allowed to want something like this. But I do. I love you." Colt smiled, genuinely smiled, open and unguarded in a way she'd never seen. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the romance novels Delilah had read as a girl. It was cold and awkward, and their noses bumped, and it was absolutely perfect. They stood on that ridge until the cold became unbearable, then walked back down to the ranch hand in hand. The second winter was easier than the first, not because the weather was kinder, it wasn't, but because they knew what to expect. They'd stockpiled properly. They'd prepared the buildings. They'd learned from their mistakes. And they faced it together. The restaurant closed for January and February, giving everyone time to rest and repair. Delilah used the break to develop new recipes, to experiment with preservation techniques, to plan for the spring season. Colt worked on expanding the operation, maybe add a few more guest rooms, maybe build a proper commercial kitchen. By March, when the thaw came again, they had a plan. By April, they were implementing it. By June, they'd paid off the last of Colt's loans. The ranch was theirs, free and clear. On the anniversary of the day Delilah had arrived, 1 year to the day since her uncle sold her, Colt gave her a gift. It was a deed. Her name on the property, official and legal. Not just the business, the land itself. "It's yours," he said. "Fully half of everything. No contracts, no conditions. Yours." Delilah stared at the paper through tears. Ownership, real ownership, the one thing she'd never had, never even imagined possible. "I can't accept this." "Yes," she said. "You already earned it." "But no buts. You saved this place. You saved me. The least I can do is make sure you never have to depend on anyone else's charity again." She thought about the girl who'd stood frozen while men bid on her future. Thought about the journey from that moment to this one. From powerless to powerful. From owned to owner. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Colt corrected, "for choosing to stay. For choosing me. For choosing this life when you could have chosen easier." That summer, they expanded, added 4 more guest rooms, built a proper kitchen, hired 2 more staff. The restaurant became what Delilah had envisioned, a destination that people traveled hours to experience, where food told stories and the settings sold authenticity that couldn't be faked. Tom eventually left, finding work on another ranch where he didn't have to confront his own bitterness daily. They replaced him with someone younger, more flexible, less angry. Jake became the ranch foreman, growing into responsibility like he'd been waiting for permission to be capable. Marcus stayed quiet and steady, the kind of man who'd found his place and had no intention of leaving it. Sarah opened her own construction business in town, but came up regularly to help with expansions and to eat Delilah's food. And Delilah became exactly what that journalist had called her. A force, someone whose story inspired others who'd been told they were too much or not enough. She didn't do it by becoming smaller or quieter or more acceptable. She did it by refusing to apologize for taking up space, by owning her size, her past, her scars, by turning survival into empire. 3 years after arriving at the ranch, Delilah stood in her kitchen, the one she owned, and watched guests eating food she'd created from ingredients she'd grown or hunted or preserved. She was wearing an apron that said head chef and owner because Sarah had made it as a joke, and Delilah wore it because it was true. Colt appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. They'd married the previous fall, a small ceremony with just the ranch family present. No white dress. Delilah wore green because she liked it. No traditional vows. They wrote their own about building things together and choosing hard over easy. "Good crowd tonight," he said. "Yeah. You happy?" She thought about it. Happiness felt too simple a word for what she felt. Contentment, maybe. Pride. The bone-deep satisfaction of knowing she'd earned every single thing she had. "Yeah," she said. "I'm happy." "Good, because I was thinking, oh no, when you think it gets expensive." He grinned. "Hear me out. What if we expanded again? Not the restaurant, something else. Maybe a program for people like you were. People stuck in bad situations who need a way out. Give them work. Training, ownership stake if they stick with it." Delilah looked at him. "That's not a small idea." "No, but nothing we've done has been small." He squeezed her waist. "We could give other people what this place gave you, a chance." It was ambitious, risky, would require resources they'd have to carefully manage. It was also exactly right. "Let's do it," she said. Because that's what they did. They took impossible ideas and made them real through work and refusal to quit. Years later, when people asked Delilah how she'd done it, how she'd gone from being sold at auction to owning a thriving business, she never sugarcoated the answer. "I survived," she'd say. "And then I decided surviving wasn't enough. I decided I deserved more than just existing, So I fought for it every single day, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. She'd tell them about winter that almost killed her, about men who doubted her, about her own doubts that screamed she wasn't good enough. And she'd tell them how she won anyway, not because she was special or chosen or lucky, but because she refused to let other people's limitations become hers. Because she learned that the things meant to break you could become the foundation of something stronger. Because she discovered that being underestimated was an advantage if you were smart enough to use it. The ranch became legendary across the region. The woman who ran it became a story people told. Proof that you could start from nothing and build everything. That your body wasn't your value. That survival was its own kind of power. And on cold mountain nights, when the fire burned low and the world felt still, Delilah sometimes thought about the girl who stood frozen in that diner. She didn't pity her. She thanked her. For enduring long enough to get here. For staying alive even when alive felt like punishment. For holding on to the smallest spark of hope that maybe, somewhere, things could be different. That girl had been right. Things could be different. Things could be extraordinary. You just had to be brave enough or desperate enough to fight for them. And Delilah Boone had fought. She'd won. And she was never, ever going back.